right, this video is going to walk you through some ideas from Hurley's Concise Introduction to Logic 1.2. And in this section, Hurley is trying to show you how to recognize an argument. Remember, the key thing to recognizing an argument is to look for the key parts of an argument, right? Every argument will have these two parts. There will be at least one statement that claims to give evidence or reasons, and another statement that is supposed to be supported by or implied by those first sets of statements. In other words, every argument has to have a premise or premises, could be more than one, premises, and a conclusion. And this attempt at proof, the attempt at proof, that's the key notion in deciding if something is an argument, is the attempt at proof. Right? If there's no attempt at proof, then you simply don't have an argument going on. Okay, so make sure that you, when looking to decide if a set of statements is an argument, ask yourself, is there an attempt at proof? If not, you don't have an argument. If there's an attempt at proof, you might have an argument, or you probably will have an argument. Now again, like sometimes it's hard to tell. And the best you can do sometimes is to say, look, this passage looks like an argument, and if it is an argument, here's the premise and here's the conclusion. Now on the quiz and things, I won't give you something that's ambiguous. And if I do, then you should argue with me about it. Give me an argument. All right. So again, the key thing here, one of the key things here is in this little paragraph. For something to be an argument, it doesn't have to be a good argument, right? I mean, I can give you an argument that is still an argument, even though it's a bad argument, right? So, for example, if I made an argument that was something like, here's what I'm trying to prove. I'm going to try and prove to you that the moon is made out of green cheese. Right? Okay, Tim, prove that. Give me some evidence for this. And I say something like, since the moon appears to look like green cheese, and since many philosophers over the years have asserted that the moon is made out of green cheese, and since I also had a dream that the moon is made out of green cheese, and since I had a belief that I've had my whole life that the moon is made out of green cheese, therefore, it follows that the moon is actually made out of green cheese. Now, that's a set of statements with at least one statement claiming to present evidence, right? And another statement that's supposed to be supported by that evidence. Now, is that a good argument? No, not at all. It's not a very good argument. And we can talk about why it's not good later on. But I think you know that was just not a good argument. But it was still an argument, right? So at this point, we're just saying, look, there are arguments, and now we're saying, look, there are sets of statements, and we're trying to sort out which of these are arguments and which of these are not arguments. Now, once we sort those out, then we can evaluate and start evaluating the arguments that we have. So in this section, you're just learning how to distinguish arguments from non-arguments. Again, one of the ways to determine if a passage is an argument is to look for indicator words, like thus, which is a conclusion indicator word, or since, or because, which are premise indicator words, right? But please note, and this is something I like to ask you about on the quiz, please note that indicator words don't guarantee that you've got an argument, because some of the indicator words in some contexts might indicate a premise, but in other contexts they might not. So here's an example that Hurley gives. This is on page 16. And this is this passage here, two statements about Edison. So Tom says, since Edison invented the phonograph, there have been many technological innovations. Okay, now that's a word of since, which is a premise indicator word, but it's used in a time way. It's a temporal notion of since, like since this time. But here in the second one, this is a logical notion. Since Edison invented the phonograph, he deserves credit, right? That's a premise indicator word. This is a premise indicator word of sense. This indicates a premise because it's used in a logical sense, or logical notion. This indicates a premise. This one is not a premise indicator word. Not a premise indicator word. So you have to be careful and remember that indicator words are generally an indication that a set of statements might be an argument, given that that indicator word introduces a premise or maybe a conclusion, but not always. Not always. So there's no guarantee with these indicator words. Just remember that. I might ask you about that on the quiz. All right. The rest of this section is a discussion of various types of non-arguments. I'm not going to go over these in detail in this video. You can read about them. I think most of them are pretty straightforward. Non-inferential passages, warnings, advice. Sometimes advice might look like an argument, but it's generally not. Look, this is a key notion. A mere statement of belief or opinion is not an argument. Right? Everyone's got an opinion on something, right? But just because I have an opinion, first of all, I hope you know, and talked about this a little bit in the relativism discussion, just having an opinion doesn't make your opinion true. Just having a belief doesn't make your belief true. I hope you know that. But anyway, that's not the context here. But having an opinion doesn't mean that you have an argument for your opinion. Now, I might have an argument for my opinion, but just having an opinion doesn't mean you've got an argument, let alone a good argument. I might have a very strong opinion about the moon being made out of green cheese. I might believe that fervently. I might base my whole life around that. Like I'm into green cheese mining and I want to send rockets up there to mine the moon of green cheese and bring it back to Earth. But if I don't have good evidence for that, or I don't even have evidence for it, then it's not I can't give an argument for it, right? So please remember that a statement of belief or an opinion alone, without evidence, without that structure of an argument, without premises that back up your opinion, then you don't have an argument going on about an opinion. Okay, loosely associated statements, reports, these are all different types of non-arguments. And there's examples of these you can look in the book. Expository passages, they might look like arguments, but again, there's no attempt to prove something. There's no attempt to prove something. And if there's no attempt to prove, you don't have an argument. Okay. Illustrations might look like arguments, but they're not, right? They're just attempts to give examples of things, but not to try and prove something. Now, there are arguments by example, right? So you can give examples of things in order to prove a point, but just giving examples doesn't prove anything without that attempt at proof. All right, explanations look like arguments also, but they're not arguments. And let me show you a difference. There's a nice little chart here. This is on page 21. An argument starts from accepted facts, or at least possibly acceptable facts, and attempts to prove something. But an explanation starts with something that's obvious, something that's obvious as what's being explained, and then just gives some things that are about that, right? So let me give you an example. Suppose you're driving to your job, and right before you get let's say you take the freeway to work, and right before you get on the freeway, or let me try it this way. Suppose you're on your way to work and you're on the freeway and traffic is just stopped and you can't figure out why, but you want to know why. So you look on your Google Maps or you turn on the radio to listen for traffic or whatever, or you call someone who's already at work, like, dude, what's going on the freeway? And they tell you, oh, there was a wreck. They had to bring a tow truck in and move the traffic off to the side, but they had to block the whole freeway because something hazardous material spilled. Right? So you're not trying to have your colleague prove to you that there's traffic on the freeway. You already know that. You just want to explain why. You just want it to be explained why. And so you call someone or you look up that information and try and have someone explain it to you. But that's what an explanation does. An argument, on the other hand, tries to prove something that may not be known, and that's why you need evidence for it. So, for example, you might get to work and maybe your boss drives from a different direction than you do to wherever you work. And you get there and you're late. And your boss starts giving you grief, giving you a hard time about why you're late. And then you might have to prove to your boss that there was traffic on your drive, and you show your boss, look, I left at, let's say you had to be at work at noon, you left at 11:30, and it's a 10-minute drive normally from where you are, and you have to go on this stretch of freeway, but it took an extra 30 or 40 minutes because there was an oil spill or something. So you show the news article, you show the traffic, you talk to your other colleagues, and you give all this evidence to your boss because you're trying to prove to your boss that there was an accident. Your boss isn't aware of that, but now your boss has some evidence and maybe an argument. So again, maybe your argument's not very good or convincing, but it's still an argument, and that's different than an explanation. So just note that distinction. I think explanations are often confused for arguments. Conditional statements by themselves are not arguments, right? If I just make an if-then claim alone, not an argument. If I make an if-then claim, an if-then claim can be part of an argument, maybe in a premise or conclusion, but by itself, it's not an argument. All right, a couple more of these. Let's see. Oh, that's it. Okay. So again, just remember that arguments always have a specific structure: premises, conclusion, attempted inference. Non-arguments don't. That's the key. That's the key idea. All right. Thanks for watching.
Stay psyched, Grom. You.